In the year 14 AD, the Roman Emperor T. Iberius was reportedly demanding annual tribute from the Germanic provinces north of the Rhine that included a specific root vegetable. Pliny the Elder, writing his Naturalis Historia roughly 50 years later, recorded the emperor's preference under the Latin name Caesar. Pliny described the vegetable as sweet, white, fragrant, and best harvested in winter. 1,200 years later, in a Benedictine convent on the Rhine, an abbess named Hildegard von Bingen included the same plant in her medical text Physica, prescribing it for skin conditions and a warning against eating it in excess. 200 years after that, the cooks of King Richard II of England prepared a dish called skyrwits in the year 1390, fritters made from the same root. By the Tudor era, under Henry VIII, the vegetable appeared in royal kitchens at every formal banquet. In 1677, the English gardener John Worledge called it the sweetest, whitest, and most pleasant of roots. By 1850, it had effectively disappeared from English cookbooks, seed catalogs, and cultivated gardens. The plant is Skirret. 1,800 years of continuous cultivation across European civilization ended within roughly a century by the rise of one specific competing crop, the potato. If you are new here, subscribe. To understand Skirret, you have to understand what it is and what it almost was. The plant originated in central or eastern China, where wild populations still grow along stream banks and forest edges. Its arrival in Europe predates the Roman period, though the precise date is uncertain. By the 1st century AD, it was clearly established in cultivation across the Mediterranean world. The Latin name Sium derives from a Celtic word meaning water, a reference to the plant's preference for moist, well-drained soils. The species name Scissorum descends from the Persian jazar, the same root word that gives us the modern English word carrot. In the language family terminology of ancient agriculture, Skirret was already understood as a close relative of carrots and parsnips when it entered the Roman world. What made Skirret different, and what made it valuable enough to demand as imperial tribute, was its sweetness. The root contains roughly 8% natural sucrose by weight. Modern carrots, which we tend to associate with sweetness, contain between 4 and 5% sucrose. Parsnips average around 6. In an era before refined sugar was widely available, a vegetable that delivered concentrated natural sweetness in a stored winter root was genuinely valuable. Romans candied Skirret with honey. Medieval European monasteries cultivated it specifically for use in Lenten desserts, times when meat was forbidden and sweetness had to come from non-honey sources. Tudor English cooks combined it with apples, cinnamon, and dried fruit to make pies that anticipated modern carrot cake by several centuries. The plant's structural characteristics distinguished it from other root vegetables in ways that carry implications for its eventual decline. A Skirret crown produces not a single taproot, but a cluster of 5 to 15 slender roots arranged in a tight bouquet beneath the central crown. Each individual root is roughly the diameter of a thick pencil and 6 to 8 inches long. This cluster shape is fundamentally different from a carrot's single taproot or a parsnip's single tapered root. It produces dramatically more harvestable mass per plant than either of those alternatives, but it cannot be machine harvested in any practical way. A potato harvester can lift potatoes from soil at industrial scale. A carrot harvester pulls carrots straight up from rows. A Skirret crown, with its bouquet of fragile branching roots, must be lifted by hand. The cluster carefully separated, the individual roots cleaned and trimmed, each one inspected for woody cores that occasionally develop in older plants. Subscribe if you want more of these stories. The labor differential between Skirret and potato harvest is roughly 20 to 1 in Skirret's disadvantage. For a household garden, this is irrelevant. 20 minutes of hand harvest produces several pounds of food, sufficient for multiple meals. For an industrial farm, 20 extra labor hours per acre is the difference between economic viability and bankruptcy. The economic geometry that emerged in 18th century European agriculture specifically rewarded crops that could be harvested mechanically. Skirret was not one of them. Potato was. The history of Skirret across European civilization is the history of every major dietary, agricultural, and medical tradition recording the same plant. In the 12th century, Hildegard von Bingen wrote in her Physica, the first major medical text by a woman in European history, that Skirret should be classified as warm and dry, useful for skin disorders when pounded with oil, but capable of stirring fevers if eaten in excess. This was the era's standard humoral medical framework applied to a plant Hildegard treated as a familiar element of monastery cuisine. In 1390, the cookbook The Form of Curry, compiled for the cooks of King Richard II of England, included Skirret in multiple recipes, spelled in Middle English as skyrwits. The name comes from the Old English skirwhite, meaning pure white, in reference to the color of the inner flesh. By 1548, Skirret was being cultivated commercially in Britain. The herbalist William Turner sometimes called the father of English botany, included it in his catalogues of cultivated medicinal plants. In 1586, the German botanist Joachim Camerarius published a detailed botanical illustration of Skirret in his new Kräuterbuch, one of the most influential German herbals of the late Renaissance. The plant by this point had fixed identities in multiple European languages. The German name was Zuckerwurzel, sugar root. The Dutch name was Suikerwortel, sugar root. The French name was Racine sucrée, sugar root. The naming convergence across unrelated language families captures what European cooks across cultures had identified as the plant's defining trait. In 1597, John Gerard, the same English herbalist who would name horseradish in his herbal, described Skirret as moderately hot and moist, easily digested, and best prepared boiled with vinegar and salt or fried in oil. In 1652, the astrological physician Nicholas Culpeper included Skirret in his complete herbal, classifying it as a vegetable under the rule of Venus, prescribing it for liver complaints and urinary tract conditions, and praising its taste as superior to carrots. In 1677, and again in his expanded 1682 edition, the gentleman gardener John Worledge published Systema Horticulturae, the most comprehensive English horticultural manual of the 17th century. Worledge devoted multiple paragraphs to Skirret cultivation, opening with the assessment that has been quoted for the past 350 years: the sweetest, whitest, and most pleasant of roots. Worledge specifically recommended Skirret for what he called weak stomachs, 17th century terminology for digestive complaints, and noted that the cooked root was particularly useful for elderly patients and convalescents recovering from illness. For roughly 2,000 years, from the early Roman Empire through the late 17th century, Skirret occupied a continuous, documented place in European royal kitchens, monastery gardens, medical practices, and medieval through Tudor home cooking. What is unusual is that this entire trajectory ended within roughly 100 years. By 1750, Skirret was disappearing from New English cookbooks. By 1800, it was rare in commercial seed catalogs. By 1850, mainstream English horticultural texts barely mentioned it. By 1900, even most professional botanists in Britain had forgotten the plant existed as anything other than a historical reference. The reason for the disappearance is the same reason the previous video on medlars covered an almost identical pattern. A plant that had no commercial advantage in the new economy of industrial agriculture became invisible not because it was bad, but because the agricultural system did not have a place for it. The replacement crop is worth examining specifically. Potato arrived in Europe from South America in the late 16th century, roughly 50 years before Skirret reached its peak Tudor popularity. For approximately 2 centuries, potato struggled to establish in European cuisine. It carried suspect associations, linked to nightshade family plants that included poisonous species, new to the agricultural pantheon, unfamiliar in flavor and preparation. Skirret, by contrast, was a known quantity, sweet, predictable, established, well-documented, traditionally medicinal. The competitive advantages began to shift in the 18th century. Potato yields were substantially higher per acre than Skirret. Potato harvests could be mechanized as agricultural equipment evolved. Potato could be stored in bulk in cool, dry cellars without complex preparation. Potato required less skilled labor at every stage: planting, hoeing, harvesting, storing, preparing. By 1750, potato was outcompeting Skirret on every economic dimension that mattered to commercial agriculture. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s, followed by improved blight-resistant potato varieties, locked in the dominance of potato across European agriculture. Skirret did not have a famine to escape from. It had no blight, no catastrophic loss of crops. It simply faded because the economic structure no longer rewarded its cultivation. What is unusual is what was actually lost in the transition. Modern nutritional analysis of Skirret root reveals a profile that compares favorably with most modern root vegetables. The root contains roughly 8% natural sugars, substantially higher than carrots or parsnips. It is rich in dietary fiber, particularly inulin, the same prebiotic fiber that gives sunchokes their nutritional profile. It contains potassium, magnesium, calcium, and vitamin C in amounts comparable to or exceeding carrots and parsnips on a per-gram basis. The flavor is genuinely distinctive. Cooked Skirret tastes like a sweet carrot crossed with a young parsnip, with subtle notes of celery and parsley from its botanical family, and a peppery aftertaste that comes from compounds in the root that disappear with cooking. Multiple modern food writers who have rediscovered Skirret describe its flavor as one of the best-tasting root vegetables they have eaten. Mark Meltonville, a food historian at historic royal palaces in London, has been working to reintroduce Skirret to British heritage cuisine. In a 2016 interview with The Telegraph, Meltonville stated directly that Skirret's flavor is superior to carrots, that it would be a successful commercial crop today if it could be mechanically harvested, and that the plant's disappearance was purely an economic decision, not a culinary one. The agricultural economists who have analyzed skirret's place in modern agriculture generally agree. The plant produces more food per square foot than carrots or parsnips, requires less annual replanting, tolerates worse soil, and produces a sweeter, more nutritious root. It loses to potatoes only on 3 measurable dimensions: total caloric yield per acre, ease of mechanical harvest, and ease of mass storage and shipping. For a household growing food on its own, none of those losses apply. For an industrial agriculture optimized for grocery store distribution at minimum cost, all of them are decisive. The result is the situation today. A vegetable that fed European royalty for 2,000 years, preserved in seed banks in a small number of heritage gardens, absent from every commercial seed catalog and grocery store in the Western world. The practical reality of growing skirret today is that it is one of the most rewarding perennial vegetables a home gardener can establish, specifically because the same traits that ended its commercial cultivation make it ideal for backyard growing. First, sourcing. Skirret seeds are not stocked by major commercial seed companies. They are available from a growing number of the heritage and specialty seed suppliers: Annapolis Seeds in Nova Scotia, Incredible Vegetables in the United Kingdom, Seed Cult in the United States, Cultivariable in Washington State, and Adaptive Seeds in Oregon all sell skirret seeds in small quantities, typically in packets of 20 to 50 seeds, priced between $4 and $8. A small number of nurseries also sell mature crown divisions, year-old plants ready to produce a small first harvest in their first season. Crown divisions are easier to establish than seeds, but more expensive, typically running $15 to $25 per plant. Second, planting. Skirret tolerates USDA hardiness zones 5 through 11 as a perennial. In zones 2 through 4, the coldest agricultural regions of North America, it can be grown as an annual, planted in spring and harvested in late autumn. The plant prefers moist, fertile, well-drained soil with access to full sun or light afternoon shade in hotter climates. Plant seeds in early spring, about 2 months before the last frost date. Sow shallowly, roughly a 1/4 inch deep, in well-prepared soil amended with compost. Skirret seeds benefit from cold stratification, either 30 to 60 days in the refrigerator or natural exposure to winter temperatures before being warmed for germination. Without stratification, germination rates can be disappointingly low. With proper stratification, germination is reliable and consistent. Once seedlings emerge, thin to roughly 12 to 18 inches between plants. The mature plant will reach about 4 feet tall, producing delicate white flowers and umbels that look similar to wild carrot or Queen Anne's lace. Water consistently throughout the first growing season. The plant tolerates moderate drought but produces tougher, more fibrous roots when stressed for water. Third, harvest. The first year produces modest roots, typically 4 to 6 inches long and the diameter of a thin pencil. The roots may be slightly woody at this stage and are best either left to grow further or used in soups and stews where the texture is less important. By the end of the second growing season, roots have reached full size, 6 to 8 inches long, a cluster of 5 to 15 roots per crown, finger thick at maturity. Harvest after the first hard frost, when the foliage has died back and the roots have stored maximum sugars. This is critical. Skirret harvested before frost has noticeably less sweetness than skirret harvested after. The cold triggers the plant to convert starch to sugar, which is why the title's claim about cold weather is biologically meaningful. Lift the entire crown with a garden fork, loosening soil carefully around the cluster. Wash the roots, trim the tops and any thin tendril roots, and check for woody cores by snapping a test root in half. If you see a clear central white core, the root is good. If you see a stringy, fibrous core, that root is best for soup, where it can be cooked long enough to soften. The same plant that produced this year's harvest should be replanted in the same location to produce next year's harvest. Skirret improves with age in a way that no annual root vegetable can match. A 4-year-old skirret plant typically produces twice the root mass of a 1-year-old plant in the same square footage. A patch established and maintained over 5 to 10 years becomes one of the most productive cold season root crops a temperate zone garden can produce. For cooking, skirret is straightforward. Wash, trim, and slice the cleaned roots into 1/2 inch segments. Boil in salted water for 12 to 15 minutes until tender when pierced with a fork. Drain and toss with butter, salt, and pepper for the simplest preparation. For a richer treatment, toss boiled skirret with olive oil and fresh herbs, then roast at 400 degrees for 15 minutes to caramelize the natural sugars. Mashed skirret, boiled until soft, mashed with butter and cream, seasoned with nutmeg and salt, is a Tudor-era preparation that holds up exceptionally well to modern palates. Skirret pies, documented in 17th century English cookbooks, combine the cooked roots with apples, cinnamon, and dried currants in a sweet savory dessert that resembles a refined carrot cake. There are 2 practical cautions worth knowing. First, the first-year roots can have woody cores that are unpleasant to eat even after thorough cooking. This is variable. Some plants produce woody cored first-year roots, others produce tender ones. The variability decreases substantially in subsequent years, which is one reason most experienced skirret growers treat the first year as an establishment year and harvest seriously starting in year 2. Second, skirret has a wild look-alike worth knowing about. The North American native plant water hemlock, Cicuta maculata, is a member of the same Apiaceae family as skirret and resembles it superficially in foliage and umbel-shaped flowers. Water hemlock is one of the most poisonous plants in North America. Do not forage skirret from wild settings unless you are absolutely certain of identification. For garden cultivation from purchased seeds, this is not a concern. The seed itself comes labeled and verified. For wild foraging, the safer rule is simply do not forage Apiaceae family roots unless you are working with an experienced wild plant identifier. What you have when you grow skirret in your garden is one of the longest cultivated vegetables in European agricultural history, producing more food per square foot than the carrots that displaced it, sweeter than any modern root vegetable, returning year after year from a single planting, and accessible only to people willing to take the time to harvest by hand. The plant has been doing this for 2,000 years. The only thing that changed is whether anyone was willing to grow it. If you have a corner of garden willing to be permanent, skirret seeds planted this spring will produce sweet, slender white roots by next autumn, and every autumn after that for as long as you maintain the patch. Next week, a flowering plant native to the American Midwest that produces edible seeds with roughly twice the protein of wheat and was a primary food source for the Pawnee and Lakota before the buffalo were destroyed. Subscribe so you do not miss it.